So most of my novels, I fancy myself as a sci-fi fantasy author that focuses on women experiences and women's stories within the sci-fi fantasy realm. So, women, Liar Queen is a bit labeled romantasy, so there's some romance in there. It's not the main plot line. But I think women who want to be transported, and that's why they read sci-fi and fantasy, would enjoy it. I try and encapsulate the female experience in all aspects. I mean, Liar Queen is about a sister, but it's also about a woman who wants to be queen. It's about a woman who is an assassin. It's about, all those things. A woman who's a captain on a ship. I'm trying to capture the experience, but in a fantastic way, in a magical world.
Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Living Next Chapter. It's an author podcast where we get to talk to great authors from around the world and celebrate new book launches and all the things that come with that. And MT is on the podcast today. We're going to talk about all the good stuff happening. And I'm excited to have MT on the show. We're going to talk about a book that just launched and other things as well for you to fall in love with. I love introducing you to an author you might not have heard from yet. And now you are going to fall in love with all things MT. MT, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Tell everybody where you are in this gigantic, gorgeous world out there.
I am in Alaska. I'm in Kenai, Alaska. It's very cold here. We don't have a lot of snow for some reason. It's kind of weird. We've been ice skating in our driveway.
Have you born and raised in Alaska? Is that your home?
Yes. No, I wasn't actually born here. We moved here when I was little, and I was raised here. So Alaska's pretty much all I've known.
So anyone who hasn't been to Alaska yet, a must-see, must-experience thing that you would suggest to anybody new to that part of the world?
Well, I suggest coming in the summer. July is a really great time to come, and then just finding some mountains and hiking mountains. We have real mountains here, so it's really fun to get out and see the change in foliage and stuff as you go higher and higher. It's fun. It's a great scene.
Good. Excellent. Well, I'm over here in eastern part of Canada, so I'm a little farther away from you, but we have some snow today, a little bit, but it's a little different climate up there as well. So it's amazing when you look at the globe and you realize where we are in relation to you and how far you are up north and how far we're south of you. It's pretty amazing. So
Yeah, I think my whole life I thought that we were like parallel with like the UK, and then it wasn't until I was probably too old that I realized, oh, we're actually a lot farther north than that.
Excellent. Great. So tell us a little bit about your author journey. I always love to know where all this begins because we see the result. We see a book on a shelf. We see a book on a website. We don't really know how you got here. So kind of what was the spark for you? Was it a person or a situation where you're like, you know what, I want to be an author?
So I actually started writing when I was 6. My family has, I think every family has those stories that a parent or grandparent tells over and over again, and you kind of learn them by heart. And you could, as soon as they start telling the story, you already know how it ends and how it goes. When I was 6 in kindergarten, I started writing down these stories, and I would, my brother would help me. He would help me remember the story, and I would write it down and illustrate it. I don't have the book anymore, but I do remember using plain paper. And since I was in kindergarten, my sentences would start straight. And then by this side, like the end of the page, they would start tipping sideways. But I don't have that book anymore, unfortunately. I do have a lot of other books I made in elementary school. I just kept making books. I really liked having the physical copy in my hands. And then in 5th grade, we actually did a publication unit. So everybody in class had to write a story. You had to have your peer edit it, and then you had to correct it. You had to illustrate it. We hand-stitched the binding. We laminated the cover. We put it all together as you would an actual book. And I wrote a story that's like a riff off Calvin and Hobbes because I loved Calvin and Hobbes. And it has a female protagonist and a stuffed mouse. And I still have that book, actually. I read it to my kids just the other day. They loved it. But that kind of got me hooked because it was an actual book. I mean, it's hand sewn, the binding, the pages aren't going to come out. And I really liked the idea, the process too, of writing that story and going through the steps and then having the physical copy at the end. I really, really enjoyed that and sharing the story. But I didn't actually pursue writing really professionally until after college. I met fellow author Nova McBee. She writes young adult thrillers. And we had a writers group together, and she said, "No, you can do this. It's not just for fun. You can follow the process and have a book in your hands." And it was then that I thought, okay, I'm going to actually do this. I think having kids kind of helped too, because you tell your kids, follow your dreams. You can do this. You can do this. And here I was not doing that. So I think having my children, telling them these things, I thought I need to be a good example and follow those dreams too. So I began pursuing publication after that.
So take us to your doorstep. First time a book that you've written has arrived at your home. First time opening that box, putting your hands on it now as an actual physical thing.
Yeah.
What does that take us there? What happened? What does that feel like?
So my first novel, I self-published. I indie published it myself, which meant I had to, fund the editing and fund the cover and things like that. So actually getting that book in the mail was really special. And it was a book. It was professional. It looked real. It wasn't just, my silly hand stitch binding. It was actually a real book that you could envision on a shelf. And I think in that moment, I felt like all of that work, all of that, some of it was play, some of it was actually me putting in the time and effort, getting, work on my craft. It kind of all coalesced in that one moment. And I honestly felt like, this is it. I've done it. I've reached where I wanted to reach. And now I need to plan my path forward.
One of the things I talk to people in my space around podcasting, I've talked to authors about this as well, battling the idea that who would ever, A, listen to my podcast, B, read my book, have any interest in anything that I created in this world, who would ever care to hear my thoughts? And in that, people then back away from their dream because they just feel like, who really cares? Yeah. But the one thing I find that when you accomplish something in life, that becomes a fact. I've learned something, I can do something. I have the copy of my book in my hand. It's sitting, I can see it. It's right there. I have proof that I've done hard things before. So anytime I'm faced with something new that makes me kind of go, I don't feel like I'm enough. You have proof, you have something there of tangible that goes, no, you've done this, you've done hard things. So does writing one book and kind of getting that into the world, does that open the door for you as an author to kind of balance out that maybe imposter syndrome feeling that sometimes we feel?
I think it definitely does. I think after having the one I had, plus it's also the actual going through the process of start to finish writing a book, putting it out there. I've learned I have the tools now. I know how to outline and stuff like that. But also just having the book in my hands made me realize that I could do this. I can write another one. And my process has gotten faster. I recently published my third novel. It came out last Tuesday. So my process has gotten faster. I feel more confident. And I think that's a large part of it is I realize that I can do the work and people do want to read it. I always tell myself, even before my first novel came out, there's going to be at least one person. There's one person out there that's going to want to read this and really like it. And I have to do it for that one person. And I do. And it turns out there's more than one person.
Nice. That's a good feeling. I like that. With 3 books now in the world, you have knowledge and wisdom that many of my listeners don't have. They're just starting their journey as an author. They're brand new to this. They just started a couple of days ago. They look at you and go, oh my gosh, I would love to be MT in this moment. The finish line looks so far away. And I'm kind of struggling a little bit in my journey as an author. From your perspective now, with 3 books in the world and sitting at this spot in your writing career, any tips or any encouragement you could give to a fellow author maybe new to the process and just starting out?
So I don't have I wouldn't say it's new information, but the idea that you have to finish that first draft, it has to be done. There's nothing, you have to have the words down on the page before you can shape it and make it beautiful. I do think that worrying about making it perfect the first time is what gets a lot of would-be authors in trouble. They want it to be great from the start, and that's not how books are made. Books are made in tiny increments and baby steps forward. Bestsellers are not written the first draft. They're just not. They've seen countless revisions and rounds with editors. So when you see that New York bestseller on the shelf, you have to realize that went through round and rounds of edits. So getting that first draft down is really important because you've done it. The big part is done. Now you get to go back and shape it and craft it into what you really, really want it to be.
You mentioned a fellow author that inspired you and encouraged you to keep going. Any other authors that have kind of been there in the background for you as a reader that you just kind of look to and go, I find inspiration in them and how they write or who they are as an author? Anybody else that stands out?
Well, my favorite author is Margaret Atwood, which sounds like a cliche, but I read A Handmaid's Tale in 5th grade, which I shouldn't have. It was far too advanced for me. But I just love her world building. I love the way she trickles in information to create this lived in real world that isn't so distant from our own. And the way she researches, I've read books about how she does research on her topics before she writes about them, is really inspiring for a fantasy writer, I think, and a science fiction writer to do the research first, do the world building first, even if your readers aren't actually going to see all that information. You as the author need to have it. So I really look up to Margaret Atwood and the way she writes and the lyrical way that she writes.
Are we going to see elements of or nods to Margaret Atwood a little bit in what you write as an author as well?
I wouldn't say that. I am very confident in the way I write, and I like the way I write. I appreciate and respect the way Margaret Atwood writes, but I'm not trying to emulate her in any way. I want to write the way I write.
Yeah. So I'm a musician outside of podcasting, and I find the music I listen to somehow, some way shapes what I do as a musician. It's kind of a melting pot of all these different influences that I kind of stir up, and it becomes that's my music.
Yeah.
But it does have little ingredients from all these different sources. So I'm always curious to see if an author has any of that kind of comes up while you're writing. You're like, oh, that's so-and-so. And oh, that feels like this person. And it's kind of, you're this unique blend of all these influences in your life.
I definitely think if you read a lot of one particular author before you start drafting, I do think your draft can take on that tone. I have seen that with my work. If I've done a lot of reading in one area with one author and then I start, I'd be like, oh, that's definitely maybe the tone or the stylistic choices they make with their sentences, which is a really nerdy talk, but I mean, it's there. I've noticed that happens a lot if I read too much of one author, so I try and be more well-rounded.
Excellent. So, okay, take us through your library. I love the fact we can say library. The library of your works. Can you take us through the order and maybe how all these books interplay with each other? Are they all standalone? I kind of like to, for the readers, when they fall in love with a new author, they're like, oh, there's more than one book?
Yeah.
Oh, good. They're so excited. So kind of take us through all of the different books, and then we're going to probably even focus more on the more recent one that's come out. But give us an overview of what you have out there for us.
Okay, so my first novel is All the Fragile Hearts. It's a duology. So that's the first book, and then the second book, Whispers in the Dark, came out last year. My first book, it came out, the idea started in a writer's group. We just exchanged images from Pinterest and wrote for 5 minutes trying to inspire a story. And my friend gave me an image of this really strong woman with a crown and a sword. So that spurred the start of the book that just came out. But then from that, I think I drafted the first 5 pages of that novel, and then I put it down. And then I decided to start playing around with other ideas with strong queens. And so that came with All the Fragile Hearts. It's about a woman who is sent to another kingdom, and she's supposed to investigate what's going on there. There's a rebellion happening. A military coup occurs while she's there, and it follows her life through the following few months of the rebellion. And then the second book comes out, and it actually happens 18 years later, and it's the end of that rebellion. So you get to see that rebellion end. And it follows 2 separate characters, but they are in the background of the first novel, so they're not complete strangers. And it's about struggle. It's about accepting who you are. It's about overcoming obstacles, things like that. And then that's its own world. And then my third novel that just came out is it's not a standalone. It's actually going to be a trilogy. And so it just came out, and that is about a queen. That queen that I initially wrote about, it's about her lying about earning the right to be queen, because in her kingdom you have to fight your sibling to the death, and then when you win, you get to be queen. And she said she did, but she didn't actually, and so that kind of comes back to haunt her, and that's what the story's about, is her trying to deal with that.
It's a very interesting way to become queen.
Yes.
You have to fight your siblings.
Yes.
Wow, that's quite extreme. I love this. This is very intriguing. So where do you draw inspiration from for your books? Like, what is this, just an imagined world that you kind of created for yourself? Like, uh, do you love history? Like, where is kind of the source of all this for you?
So I draw inspiration from a lot of things. When I'm building up my characters, I like to do a lot of reading memoirs, reading biographies on people, because I like to pick out actual little quirks and ticks from real life people, because I feel like it makes the character realistic. Or I'll watch, YouTube history channels, things like that. Trying to build an actual person in my head before I actually write that character down. I also people watch. I do, you watch people out in the wild and they do funny things or interesting things, and it makes it a real person when you include it with your character in your novel. The fantasy world setting, especially with my recent book, Liar Queen, a lot of those descriptions come from Alaska, where I grew up. It's the mountains are huge. The forests go forever. I mean, it's a really epic place in and of itself. So I think it's actually a really great inspiration for fantasy novels. And then just being really aware of my environment when I travel. There's some desert scenes in Liar Queen that I drew inspiration from when I went to Arizona last year. So just being really aware, not just visually, but like, how do I feel in this hot desert? What do I see? What do I smell? Just using your senses to really capture those moments. And if you have to take notes, put it in your phone, and then you can draw from it later when you're trying to set a scene that's set in a desert or set in a forest.
I see. No, that's interesting, because now when we're reading, we can picture Alaska, we can picture Arizona, right? So that kind of puts us in time and place.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of sense of time period for these books, or is it outside of what we would consider time?
No. So the first two books is just medieval time frame, and then Liar Queen is the same. There's a bit French inspiration in there. I have done family history and realized that my ancestors were Huguenots who were kicked out from France. So I've always had a passion for French culture. I've studied French. I've been trying to learn how to speak it for the past 4 years, which is difficult. So there's some French inspiration in there for the main character's culture. There's some French words thrown in there just for fun to add to the world building, to add some texture and to make the world feel lived in. But other than that, it's, medieval.
That's interesting too. Another language as well added to the mix.
Just randomly.
Locations, you got the language, right? It's just kind of, but that's nice. I love all these things fitting together. I just talked to an author yesterday from Paris, France, coming on the show in the next couple of weeks, and just listening to him talk, I'm just like, I feel like I've traveled the world, and it's so cool to hear all these different influences and to hear the history that he brings up in his writings. It's just so unique. So I love that you're drawing from French history as well. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So for a reader, do you have in mind when you're writing, do you have an ideal person you're writing to? Do you have an audience that you're thinking of that would really enjoy these stories? Because what I'm trying to do for the listener and the reader is for them to self-identify and go, oh, Liar Queen is my new book. I know I need it, and I know someone's going to love this.
Yes.
Just based on what you're saying here on the podcast. But did you have any idea of who you were writing to when you wrote these books?
So most of my novels, I fancy myself as a sci-fi fantasy author that focuses on women experiences and women's stories within the sci-fi fantasy realm. So, women, Liar Queen is a bit labeled romantasy, so there's some romance in there. It's not the main plot line. But I think women who want to be transported, and that's why they read sci-fi and fantasy, would enjoy it. I try and encapsulate the female experience in all aspects. I mean, Liar Queen is about a sister, but it's also about a woman who wants to be queen. It's about a woman who is an assassin. It's about, all those things. A woman who's a captain on a ship. I'm trying to capture the experience, but in a fantastic way, in a magical world.
Okay, this is great. So the book was recently launched. Liar Queen just came out. You mentioned before we hit record that you've done some public stuff around the book. Tell me a little bit about what you just did recently, and maybe some experiences from that event where you were talking to readers. What did you just do recently around the launch of the book?
So I had a meet and greet, a signing at a local bookstore, and I talked about my my childhood and how it led to writing, which I've already talked about. But I also talked about the process of how I went about traditionally publishing Liar Queen, whereas my first two novels are self-published. And I got to talk to a lot of people that were there. It was kind of scary at first, but after I started talking to people, it was really, really fun. I talked to this one gentleman who told me that he had a story in mind he had always wanted to write, and he just thought no one would want to read it. And then after listening to me talk, he decided he was going to do it. And that was really inspiring for me, even though he was saying I inspired him to know that he wanted to write his story and share it. So I talked for him for several minutes. He was really fun. And then there was several women there that had just started their own book club, and they wanted to read fantasy books. And then they heard about me talking that night, so they decided to come and listen. And after listening, they said, yeah, we want your book to be our first book for the book club. So it was fantastic. My sister was there, so I got to embarrass her since Liar Queen is about sisters. So that was fun. It was good. It was a great turnout. No.
Good.
No.
No sisters were harmed at all?
No sisters were harmed. No sisters were harmed.
Good.
We didn't fight in the parking lot afterwards. It was great. But it was fun. I honestly feel like I was worried. You know, you always worry with your first event. Probably every single event afterwards, I'll worry, is anyone even going to show up? So to have, I was roughly 20 people there, all of them asking questions. They asked great questions, some about crafts, some about publication, some about the story itself. But I mean, there's tons of questions. I was surprised. I really was, but in a good way. It was really, really fun.
When you're writing the book, I was curious about this from an author's perspective, when you can insert things that are kind of like little nuggets, little things you can't wait for people to uncover in the story. Mm-hmm. And you hear them say, you ask them, what chapter are you on? Oh, I'm on chapter 2. Oh, just wait till you get to chapter 3. Like oh my gosh, it's going to, in your mind, you're like, I can't wait for you to get to the next thing. As you're writing this, what is the proudest moment in the story, without any, spoilers, obviously, mm-hmm. for Liar Queen? Is there a part in the book that you just are so satisfied about when you're writing it? You're like, oh, it's all making sense, and I love this part.
Yes.
Is there a part that we can really look forward to?
So I say maybe around the midpoint. There's a part where they have to spend the night at a chateau, and that's a real turning point for my main character as far as believing in herself. But I also just really enjoyed that part just because I felt like my description, the way I painted the scene, I'm just really, really proud of it. I've had a lot of people comment on really enjoying that scene. So yeah, I'd say that point, and then onward when my main characters have traveled to this other place. The world building, the character arcs, they've almost reached their climax, and you can just almost taste it, that they're almost there. They're almost where they need to be. It's really my favorite part too, and that's the latter half of the book.
So tell us more about your main character for Liar Queen. What do you it kind of captures your attention about this character? Like what draws you to this Liar Queen?
So her name's Mara. Mara is I purposefully wrote her to be unlikable at first. I didn't want her to be liked. And I have gotten loads of comments saying I did not like this woman at first. I did not like her. And then I did at the end. I decided, yes, I was rooting for her. And so I purposely wrote her with the intent of I wanted the reader not to like her. I didn't want them rooting for her at first. I wanted to have to work for it. And I've done that. I think I've done that. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of her own arc of wanting to pretend to be what everyone expected of her, and then slowly realizing, no, I need to be who I am. I need to rule this kingdom the way I want to rule it. So I'm really proud of her character arc and how it came together in the novel.
When we read about Mara in the book, I'm curious, because you're building a character, you're building somebody for us in a world around this character. There's sometimes, I find that when I talk to authors about character building, that there's elements of their character they just don't know fully. Like you know your character pretty well, but there's things you don't know about them yet. You haven't really gone deep in that element of their character. And you would love to spend some time with them, like one-on-one, to kind of ask them some questions about them, which could open the door to even more in the story. If you had time with Mara, just the two of you, and you could sit down and ask your main character any question at all, something you're a little curious about them as a person or their story, anything come to mind that you'd be like really curious to actually sit in front of them and ask them a question? What would you ask them?
Oh gosh, that's a really hard question. I don't know. Mara is a lot more headstrong than I am. She comes across as more. I'm a listener. I like to listen to people talk. I like to ask questions and have someone else talk about themselves. Whereas Mara is queen, so she may not a narcissist, but definitely arrogant in that way. So I don't know what I would ask her. It would definitely have to be something about her childhood and her relationship with her parents, maybe, because I go into a lot of detail about her relationship with her mother and the expectations her mother have laid upon her to become the queen. But I don't go into a ton of detail about her relationship with her dad, who sides with her sister and wants her sister to be queen. So I probably word a question around parenting and her relationship with her parents, because I do find that aspect really interesting. It's just not completely fleshed out in the novel because the narrative moves forward and doesn't actually go backward. So
that's interesting. Okay, so put us in the room as the world around Mara, and she walks into the room. And what do people do? Are we nervous? Are we excited to see her as the people in her community, in her world? Like, kind of give us the feel of what does the room feel like when this character walks through the door? Are we jumping to our feet? Like, I want to get a sense of who she is just by how she shows up.
Yes. So in the Jeweled Realm, it's a war machine of a country, or it has been up until Mara's ascension. Her grandmother founded the nation through war. She was a warrior queen. She just kind of steamrolled other kingdoms, other small communities, and took them into her own kingdom. And her mother perpetuated that. So this image of stand to attention, show some respect, be afraid has been perpetuated onto Mara. She has done the bare minimum to earn it, but that's part of her problem. She doesn't necessarily want to represent that image, but she is a staunch believer in tradition, and she knows that this is who her mother and her grandmother were. She knows they founded this kingdom with violence, and she knows that that's expected of her. She's been trained that way, but mentally she wishes there was another way. So when she enters a room, people pay attention, people listen to her, and she enjoys that power. But she also knows that underneath it, she questions where the loyalty actually is.
Okay, see, now that's a good picture. I like that. That's good. I love that. When you're writing multiple books at a time, like I'm trying to picture, like when you wrote your first two books, did you have like a piece of paper for book one and a piece of paper for book two, and you're kind of writing them at the same time? So you kind of have the same world and you understand how these two books are going to play off each other? Are you writing one book complete, finished, all done, and then you start a brand new book based on the first book? How, as a reader, I don't understand how an author can write and keep all these things together over multiple projects. And then some of them are doing it at the same time. I don't understand how you amazing authors can do this. So kind of take us behind the scenes of your process, maybe for the first two books, and then for Liar Queen and beyond. How do you write when you have multiple things in your mind?
So I think it's different for every book. Every book is its own creature as far as how that works. With my first novel, All the Fragile Hearts, it was written, and I didn't think about writing a second book. It was only after it came out that I reread it, and several other people read it, and they said, oh, is there going to be more? Are we going to find out what happens to her? And then I started playing around with the idea of another book, but set 18 years later with different characters, because I enjoy that when I'm reading, that sometimes a preceding book actually isn't with the same main characters. We don't have to follow the same main characters. They're there, but they're not our focus. Our focus is someone else. So I played around with that idea with the second book, Whispers in the Dark, and I enjoyed it. It was a practice in working on my craft and figuring out how the story can interlace with each other. So that was enjoyable. But with Liar Queen, I have everything outlined from start to finish, from book 1 all the way through book 3.
Oh, wow.
With the intent of writing the 3 different books. I wanted to make sure the stories worked into each other the right way. But I mean, I know authors who do that. I know authors that write one book just like I did, and then they said, oh, I want to write another one in that series. And so they write another one. I think it just kind of depends. I'm happy with the way both series have worked out because I've learned new skills with each one. I get to apply new tools with each one. It's been, as long as I'm growing as a writer, I'm having fun. I think it's great. So I'm going to do it that way.
Okay. All right. Another question around writing. As an author, do you kind of write visually? Like, do you see everything? Do you feel like you're there in the moment and all this is happening around you in a real world setting? Or are you just coming to a blank piece of paper and crafting the right word in the right moment? Like, I'm just kind of trying to picture, like, how do you see the process of writing the book, maybe compared to how the reader might experience it?
I definitely see it visually in like a cinematic way, I guess. A lot of the early reviews for Liar Queen comment on how vivid the world building is and how vivid the descriptions are. People feel like they're in that scene. And that's how I come to it. I want my writing to convey what I'm seeing too. So I definitely see it that way. Sometimes when I come to the blank page, it's just a blank page and I have to like focus and try and get myself in the scene and see it. But I think the reason why my writing is so vivid with the imagery and the world building is because that's how I approach the task, is seeing it that way.
For our authors that are listening to, you mentioned people watching, bringing in unique quirks from people and making the story feel real. Any other things that anchor a world when you're doing world building that maybe another author could be like, oh, never thought of doing that? Is there any other things that you purposely do as you write to make sure that world feels as real as possible?
Well, I did mention making sure you use all your senses, which I know is like old hat by now. People are like, oh, I know I've heard that before. But it's really important to think about, if you're standing in this scene, you're not just seeing something. You are like, how do you feel internally and how do you feel externally? What do you see? What can you touch? What can you smell? Even if you don't use all those senses in the scene, it makes it more vivid in your mind so that as you're writing, it comes across clearer for the reader.
For your characters as well, whether or not the information makes its way into the book as like actual words on a paper, how much investment do you make in your characters to go deep into who they are as people so that you can write from a perspective of knowing them more fully? Like how deep do you get with each of your characters?
So I try and figure out what they want first, foremost, because everybody wants something, right? So I try and figure out what they want, how they want to achieve it, if they want to even achieve it, and if it's achievable. I try and figure those things out first. And then I try and always figure out some quirk that makes them them. Like with the male main character in Liar Queen Bowden, his quirk is that he's exceptionally religious and adores a certain saint from his religion. And he talks about the saint often. He brings it up in anecdotes and whatever, and it annoys the main character, Mara, to no end because their kingdom isn't religious. So he always brings it up, and it just bothers her all the time. In my novel, Whispers in the Dark, I have a character who is obsessed with mushrooms. He knows everything about them. He loves them. And so one of the characters gets into a fight and has an injury, and he says, "Oh, there's a mushroom I can use to heal that." And the other character is like, "Of course, there's a mushroom. There's always a mushroom." So I try and have quirks that they each have to make them seem like a real person. But yeah, that's how I approach them. I try and get to know them and what they want, and then I try and give them characteristics that make them unique.
And that's satisfying for the reader. I love that when they're like, I can see myself. Like, I love mushrooms or something. And you're like, oh, I can't believe this is my person.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
This is good. So let's talk to the reader. MT, they just bought the book. They have Liar Queen, just came out. They're excited. It just arrived at their door. And as a reader, it's the first time they get to put their hands on your book. They're going to sit down. They got a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, just brewed, ready to go. I'm going to jump into the book. Before I open the book, your love letter to the reader, what do you want them to know? What's your message to them? And then they're going to start reading. Just to kind of picture that person holding your book. What do you want them to know about this book?
So I wrote the book with the intent of demonstrating that you can overcome the childhood baggage that we bring with us. I'm not talking about trauma, but like just everyone has that baggage they bring from childhood, the expectations put on us from our parents or someone who we look up to. And that it's heavy. It can be really heavy, especially if we add on to it ourselves as we get older. So I wrote this book with the intent of showing that you can set that down and step into yourself fully and be who you are fully. That's what Mara does throughout the story. That's her journey. So that's who I wrote this book for, and that was my intent. So as annoying as Mara might be at the beginning, just stick by her because she has a great redemptive character arc, I promise.
So now, okay, so you talk about all the things that we go through as kids growing up and how influential that time is in our life. It would be amazing, just putting it out there, MT, that you did talk about reading to your kids and all of that, how much joy that brings you. Do you think, can we leverage and kind of pry you a little bit to maybe do some sort of kids version of some of what you just talked about? Because I think kids need to get that kind of information.
Yeah.
And fall in love with a story like that in a kid's version, obviously, but
Yeah.
in the sense that all of those big things that you just talked about, they're so important.
Yeah.
And I just think we need more of that from amazing authors like you who could maybe rework the basic ideas of what we just talked about, but in a kid's term, to have that story to read to our kids at night. There's something special there. You know, that's kind of it's like the counter to fixing things as adults. Well, maybe we can help the kids before they have to fix them as adults.
Right, yeah.
By giving them good stories like that. I don't know. There's something there that just makes me curious. I know it's completely outside of what we're talking about.
I think it's important to think about because, like you said, like I'm talking to adults here, but why can't we take a step further and talk to children about it? Because it is, I'm not saying that it, like I said, it's not trauma, but it's just the expectations are heavy when you're little. And my parents, I had a great childhood, but I felt that weight for a long time. And shedding it, I think, is freeing if you can do that, if you realize that you're carrying the weight and setting it down. So I think approaching children in a softer way would be a great idea.
Interesting. Be kind of like I'm picturing a child carrying something all the time. It's like you can put that down. You know, it's like, oh, I thought I had to carry this. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's just something in there I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is a great idea.
There you go. Well, we'll keep our eyes open just in case. We'll go to your website as well, okay, because you never know what children's book might arrive and be like, I heard about that on the podcast. Anyway, MT, take us to your website. Where do we go to stay in touch with you? I'm really curious to what's coming up for you in the future. We'll get to that in a second, but take us to your website. What are we going to see when we get there?
So my website, themtsolomon.com, it has about me page. There's some interviews I've done there that are listed there. There's my newsletter you can sign up for via Substack. I try and get that out around the 7th every month, but that didn't happen this month. It doesn't happen most months, but it comes out every month, and it just talks about what I'm doing in life, and then it talks about my writing, what I'm reading, my inspiration, and then there's usually a free tidbit in there, like a map or an excerpt from something I'm working on, something like that. And then you can find my books there, about my books. You can follow the link to purchase them.
So if you buy the copy of the book and you live in Arizona, take the book out to the desert, take it out there and take a picture of it, send it to MT. So your book is in Arizona. You're reading it down there in the heat. Send a picture so that MT can have a copy of that.
Yes.
If you're climbing the mountains in Alaska and you get to the summit, you're like, stop, pull the book out, snap a picture, send it to MT, right? Send a picture of wherever the book ends up in this world. And then I think MT would love to see that.
Yes, I love it. I would love to see that. I would use it in my world building for sure. All the pictures.
There you go. Awesome. Okay, so as we wrap up, MT, the podcast is Living the Next Chapter. You've alluded to there's more books coming. Outside of writing and all the great things coming up with your books and all of that, how are you living your next chapter? What are you excited about coming up here in 2025?
I actually coach high school volleyball, so I am looking forward to the volleyball season. It starts in August and goes through November, so it's kind of a longer season. But we won state last year. We are Alaska state champions. So I'm looking forward to the next season and building the team a bit and having fun with the girls. They teach me a lot because I have all boys, so It's my time to spend with high school girls and figure out what's trendy and what's cool, I guess.
There you go. You learn all the TikTok dances and everything.
Yes, all the good. TikTok. That's my TikTok time is August and November.
There you go. Well, you just spiked that over the net. That was wonderful. Really good. MT, glad to have you on the podcast. Congratulations on all the books and all the things coming. And again, thank you so much for making time to be here to share your story.
Yeah, thank you.
With us and for the readers that are listening. I'm asking everyone, when you buy, because I know you are, when you buy a copy of all of 3 of MT's current books, that you leave a great review, because I think that brings more people to the website. They're going to read your words and why this book is so important to you as a reader. Make sure you give a detailed review. That people are just like, oh, this is the right book for me. And when you buy one, I know you have friends as listeners. There's someone else you're thinking of as you hear this interview. You're like, I'm just going to buy one for them as well. So buy 2.
That's right.
Let's do twice in it, right?
Sharing is caring.
Okay,
yeah.
There you go. So buy 2, leave great reviews, and make sure you share this episode with somebody so that they can fall in love with this amazing story and this amazing author. MT, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun, well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube. Whatever app you're listening on, you'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.